Here to discuss, Hanna Wheatley, a housing researcher at the New Economics Foundation. Good afternoon to you, Hanna.
Good afternoon.
What happened? I mean, it was a good idea. I mean, it was a good idea from David Cameron. We have a housing crisis. He threw out some suggestions of how we might deal with that crisis, and 5 years down the line, nothing's happened.
There's a few things there. Firstly, I would say that it wasn't a good idea, and that's part of the reason that the policy is dead in the water. And we'll come on to that in a bit.
Okay,
but yeah,
please.
just to say that this was kind of Cameron Osborne's flagship housing policy for solving the housing crisis. But because of the kind of inconsistencies and incoherence in the policy itself, the policy has resulted in absolutely no starter homes being built. And as you said, that money being spent on land for other developments, which are mainly market housing.
So housing has been built, but not the housing that is required to address the housing crisis.
Absolutely, and I think that really points to kind of the heart of the government's view on the housing crisis, which is supply, build, without any kind of view about the actual kinds of homes that we need or where we need them. And it's why that the government's approach to the housing crisis has been this kind of collection of terrible policies, none of which have actually resulted in the kind of massive increase in affordable housing that we need.
OK, Hanna, well, tell us why you think David Cameron's idea, his possible solution to the housing crisis way back in 2014, why you don't think it had legs?
So, I mean, firstly, you kind of touched on this, the homes would have a 20% discount, so they'd be set at 80% of market rates. That's kind of widely considered to be unaffordable to most people.
They'd still be too expensive.
Exactly,
right,
yeah. When the policy was designed, homes would have cost, using that with the 20% discount, $450,000 in London, and would only have been affordable to people on average incomes in about 2% of the country. So kind of billing this as an affordable housing product is a bit of a mistake, really. And on top of that, a recent government study has shown that new builds actually attract a 19% premium anyway, which basically wipes out that 20% discount.
Isn't it just? What a mess. What I'm mystified by is how money that had been earmarked for these starter homes appears to have been unearmarked and gone elsewhere. Who decided that? When was that? When did that happen?
Well, absolutely, and I think it kind of, as I said, points to this supply mantra. And I think we need to kind of look at the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, because that will be where a lot of these decisions have been made. A lot of that money in different pots has been spent on, acquiring land that needs kind of remediation, so industrial land or land that's not immediately suitable for housing.
Now, I know,
fixing it up and then selling it to developers.
I just quite kind of blows my mind. I know, Kevin, you got some details about Boris Johnson and his reign as London mayor and what he did for the housing crisis in our capital.
Yeah, Hannah, when Boris was mayor, he reduced the number of social homes he funded from 1,687 in 2012 to 336 in his final year of office. And when Sadiq Khan came into office, Boris had left him no social funding at all for homes.
No new houses.
No new houses
London
at all. So I guess the question is it a picture nationally that the first thing that goes in these well-laid plans to increase housing is building new houses?
Affordable homes.
Yeah.
Affordable.
Yeah. Absolutely. One of the other problems with this, and you're right that we've seen an absolute decimation of both social housing stock through Right to Buy, but then also the building of new social housing. I think nationally last year we only built something like 6,000 new social homes, and Shelter have said that we need to build 3.1 million over the next 20 years. So there's a real kind of mismatch there. One of the big problems I have with these starter homes is that they would have actually displaced affordable social housing. So one of the ways that we get developers to build social housing is through Section 106 agreements. So we say, okay, you can build that many market houses, but you have to build X% of social homes. The government policy at the time, when they developed the starter homes idea, said that they could do starter homes instead of social housing. And so developers would have done that and built starter homes. And I say would have had that policy happen, but actually, even though no starter homes have actually been built, developers have still been using the terminology starter homes for homes that they are building and selling at 80% market value. So they're already displacing social housing on these developments and as part of these agreements without ever having actually been built.
OK, Hannah, let's see if we can turn this around into something more positive. So, so way back in, when was I? 1989 it was, I was a local newspaper reporter around sort of Heathrow, actually where Kevin grew up, the Staines area.
Yes.
And back then, just as I was finishing my career on local papers, the big buzz then was a part ownership, shared ownership for, they were particularly looking at nurses and low-paid teachers, where you paid part rent and part mortgage on a property. And at the time, everybody seemed to think that this was a future model for affordable housing that we could roll out to the future. Well, here we are now, 30-odd years down the line. I hardly hear anyone talk about a shared ownership, renting and buying simultaneously. What happened to that model? Does it work? Can it work? That's
interesting, because actually I do hear quite a lot about shared ownership, and that's
Good.
because,
Is
not
it?
COVID, yes, sorry. It's all doom and gloom here. Unfortunately, shared ownership is another one of those sort of intermediate affordable housing products that lots of people argue aren't actually affordable, but they're another one of these that developers really like starter housing and discounted market rate housing, which they also build a lot of. And so when a local authority, a planning authority says, OK, you can build this development, but you have to build 20% affordable housing, they'll pack that out with shared ownership and with starter homes that aren't actually starter homes and discounted market rates, and squeeze out as far as possible social housing. And we can invent all of these different kinds of affordable housing we like, and that's what this government has been hell-bent on doing. But the homes that are genuinely affordable and actually affordable are social homes, and so that's what we really need the government to be investing in, rather than spending all this money on land, which they have done with this policy, to go and build market homes, even to actually build the social housing.
Sorry, Hannah, is that where
no, go ahead.
Is that where you're at the New Economics Foundation? That it's really down to government to return to the sort of post-war social housing council house building programme? That's the only way we're going to get on top of this problem?
Absolutely. I mean, that's a key pillar of it, and we're about to start doing some really exciting work on that, looking at how we build the 3.1 million social homes that Shelter has called for. In addition to that, we'd say that we need to kind of overhaul and massively regulate the private rented sector, which now takes up a massive proportion of the housing market, which it didn't before when we had so many social homes. And so we also talk about rent controls and various other measures that would make tenancies more assured and give tenants greater power.
The trouble, I guess, with looking to government to fund that level of social housing is that with the Conservative Party in particular, which of course has been in government in one form or another since 2010, is that historically they kind of have opposed council housing. Mrs Thatcher wanted councils to get rid of their housing stock. I think she saw it as a potential cash burden, and she banned councils from taking the money from council house sales to build new affordable housing. So I mean, you're talking about 3 million new houses in, 20 years, you said?
20 years, yeah.
Who's going to fund that? I mean, who? I mean, it's not, I mean, if I can't see it's going to be from central government at the moment. Not with Brexit and everything else going on.
Absolutely. It's a really big question, and that's one that we're going to be getting to the bottom of in the next couple of months. One thing that we are really keen to see is one of the biggest factors and costs in housing is actually the cost of land, which has increased something like fivefold since 95, I think. So we've really seen land prices as one of the main kind of barriers to building social housing and affordable housing. But at the same time as that's true, we've got the government, which is pursuing a policy of selling off public land. Yeah. So central government departments and also local authorities are selling land that they don't need, and they're mainly selling it to private developers. So I've looked at the planning documents and analysed that sale and found that only 6% of homes built on surplus public land will be for social housing. And so what we'd like to see is all of that land retained and developed specifically for social housing, and some mixed development where appropriate, but mainly that public land should be used for public benefit, and that land then acts as a subsidy, so then you can reduce grant to build the social housing that we need.